Aoceoachella. Okay. All right, we are caught up. So now it's time for some comments. And this is warming up. If you can't handle the comments, you got to drop out before the Vanguard video. Because, oh my, words start to just melt together in the white heat of rage when I think. No, the blind, oh my God. I was trying to show somebody the Vanguard video the other day. We got about 3 minutes into it before the raging began. And not by me either. The person I was showing it to. So painfully wrong and so headstrong about it. All right, so I got like 20 Bernie comments, and we're just going to take these like rapid fire lightning round, I guess. A couple of these are like okay comments, most of them are not. And I labeled a couple of them, but I didn't label most of them. So this is like a little bit of like reaching into the hat grab bag here. What do we have? If what is being said about Sanders in the Post is true, I guess. See, this is like, it's always fun reading YouTube comments because you got to fill in a lot of blanks. If what is being said about Sanders in the Post is true. Oh, you know what? Let me back this up even because I should read the Post, right? And these comments I should also add come from a variety of sources. They come from the Bernie. Mostly they're from the people holding up the Palestine flag getting thrown out of the rally while Bernie's like just waves his arms at the crowd to be quiet. Some are also on the community post that I did. Let me read you one of the community posts. On the Bernie Sanders AOC anti-oligarchy rallies, posted 9 days ago. Social democratic reformists like Bernie Sanders exist to channel working class anger back into the quote-unquote left wing of capitalism, as we just covered with the Browder, the meaning of social fascism, and the Dutt, fascism and social democracy quotes. If you are just coming in at this point, please go back and listen to those because it will explain how it is valid to say that how social democratic reformists end up serving as defenders of capitalism for, when that is a useful tool of the capitalists, and then the fascists take over when that doesn't work anymore. So they're part of a system supporting it. And this is me, I eagerly supported Sanders in 2016 as a major step forward with the hope that he would take the obvious opportunity to lead tens of millions of people out of the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party is about 50 million people. I think the idea that he could have led at least a couple of million dedicated people into the Green Party or a new Labor Party, whatever. And again, this is back before he had done any of the major betrayals. So in 2016, Clinton gets the nomination in July. Sanders says, okay, no, I'm going to tell my supporters, hold your nose, vote for Hillary, yada, yada, shake hands with the Democratic Party. Now we're going to go. They're not going to blame us for Trump winning, in other words. And now we're going to go and start our own thing. And we'll see you in 2018 and 2020. And we'll be organizing in your community along the way. That would have been, to me, I would have applauded greatly. That obviously was not, he was not a socialist at heart. And this was the whole thing with the democratic socialism. Oh, Bernie's a democratic socialist. What does that mean? He's actually a social democrat. And I did some trying to unpack this in the first year of this channel. Like, that a democratic socialist is kind of somebody more like Allende from Chile. And if you're interested in that, we have both 4 pieces from Salvador Allende on the channel, which actually illustrates quite well the tragic trajectory of Allende getting elected, challenging the capitalists, and then immediately being ousted in a coup, because that's how that goes, because he didn't organize along Marxist-Leninist lines. And if you want a breakdown of why it failed, we have another audiobook called The Tragic Events in Chile by Hoxha, Hoxha, from I think like 73, maybe? Somewhere around there, 75. But it was basically Hoxha, an ardent Marxist-Leninist, commenting on if you don't do Marxist-Leninist organizing, you just try to get elected via the capitalist parliament, your movement is not set up to actually oppress and abolish capitalism. It's not set up to wage the class war against capitalists that it needs to, and they're just going to oust you in a coup, which is exactly what happened. And it was a very good, tasteful presentation. I think a lot of people today, would say, be kind of nasty about it. He titled it the tragic events in Chile, which it is, but he also traced this back to the revisionist Khrushchevite and Brezhnevite CPSU, and how they were promoting this line in alliance with European social democracy, that there was now a peaceful parliamentary road to socialism. And Allende tried to take that road and got butchered. So that's what you get following. That is those are the fruits, in other words, of social democracy. I'm not trying to say that that's what you get in terms of deserving it. I'm saying that's what you get if you follow that road. Don't take that road. Those people are misleading you. If you get into power and you actually try to do the thing, you try to abolish capitalism, you try to wage serious class war, they will fucking murder you. Okay, that's what they do. So, like, is Bernie a democratic socialist, where the noun is socialist, like he's for socialism, and the adjective is democratic. He wants to do it via capitalist democracy. Or does it mean he's a socialist, but like not the bad authoritarian, quote unquote, kind? Like, is this some kind of weird anti-Stalin thing, or what are you talking about? Or anti the myth of Stalin thing? Or is it actually just a fancy way of misleading people into thinking you're a socialist when you're actually a social democrat, democracy meaning capitalism, and social being the adjective, meaning you're just sort of modifying the capitalism a little bit? It was unclear, because Bernie was talking like favorably about Cuba for a while in that primary. It was like not clear at that point. Is he more of a socialist? Is he more of a social democrat? Well, it came out anyway. But yeah, he could have done it at that time, and that would have been the nucleus of something finally at critical mass in one shot, which I think is, the easiest and best way to do it. Fascism, again, is not inevitable, but if you stop, but if you just keep refusing every practical opportunity to do it, you end up at fascism. And that was, for me, why it's so frustrating doing this, because I've been watching since the Bush years of like, holy shit, somebody has to stop this. This is getting crazy now. They're doing all this Patriot Act stuff and the torture and Guantanamo Bay. Like, somebody's got to fucking stop this. Obama didn't stop it. And then I was like, well, maybe we can pivot from the fake progressivism of Obama into like some real shit with Bernie Sanders. And then, of course, that turned out to be another fake. And it's like, oh, we're really doing this the hard way. We're walking all the way down the end of the capitalist democracy road, which, where does that end? Chat, say it with me. Fascism. As Dutt pointed out, the end of capitalist democracy, that road leads to fascism. It's not inevitable. You can get off the road of capitalist democracy and into socialism, but if you don't, you will definitely and assuredly end up in fascism. And it's just been so painful watching, people just learn this the fucking hard way here. And it is partly for lack of information. All right. Sanders not only refused to lead millions of people out of the Democratic Party, but barely spoke out about the ways the Democratic Party had unfairly fought back against the huge anti-status quo, pro-Medicare for all movement that Bernie had rallied. He pulled a lot of people out of the woodwork who had given up on politics, and he brought them back out. You think they're going to come out again after his shit? No. This is in line with the 1990s deal that Sanders made with the Vermont Democratic Party, that if he didn't start a Labor Party, they wouldn't seriously challenge him. And I put a link to that at the bottom. It's a Counterpunch article. Bernie did the same again in 2020, but worse, rolling over for his good friend Joe Biden as soon as the pandemic broke out. He was like neck and neck with Biden up to that point, and he just threw in the towel. They had that like last debate where even talking about the beginning pandemic before it was like declared the full-on emergency, and Biden was like, well, Medicare for all wouldn't even help in the pandemic because look at Italy. They have national health care and they still have a pandemic. Yeah, but they don't have to pay for it at the point of service. What? Anyway. Also, like, you're guaranteeing that like everybody gets treated, without worrying about the money. It's so nuts. Anyway. Bernie's been totally irrelevant ever since. In my opinion, after he did that, that was like the end. of even giving this guy half a chance. Remember the working groups that the Dems granted Bernie following his caving for Biden that summer? They were a joke. The groups were sabotaged and ignored, and the right-wing Biden administration ultimately helped to pave the way for a rested and ready return of a significantly more extreme Trump in 2025. The rank-and-file people who are following Bernie, wanting him to do something real, are some of the most progressive people in the USA, but they're completely wasting their time, or at least had been following Bernie. A lot of the most progressive have dropped out of following Bernie at this point, although they haven't stopped being, progressive or socialist or whatever. But they're completely wasting their time, the ones still following him, with Bernie as a quote-unquote leader. The U.S. left consequently continues to be stuck with no major labor movement and no major anti-imperialist political leaders. Now, I know somebody out there is probably going to be like, but Bernie's having labor leaders speak, the heads of various unions speak at these rallies. And guess what? You got a lot to learn about the labor movement if you don't know yet that all unions are not created equal and that unions can be captured by social democratic reformist leadership and turned really shitty and basically used as a weapon against the workers. They have been historically a major weapon against the workers, unions with the wrong kind of leadership. If your quote left quote leaders are still promoting the 1% owned, genocidal imperialist Democratic Party as part of a solution to the problems facing the U.S. working class and the exploited and oppressed of the global South, they're not leaders, they're misleaders. It can be a hard truth to face, but it is true. We need a militant, anti-capitalist labor movement fighting for socialism at home and to dismantle the empire abroad. And Lenin wrote about this a lot, the need to combine the proletarian struggle for socialism in the imperialist countries with the anti-colonial, anti-neocolonial movements in the global South. In other words, don't just do social chauvinism, And then conversely, the three worlds ists in the global South, cutting off from the first world is also not. These need to work together. We need that cooperation. If Bernie had led a 10 million or 15 million voter chunk out of the 50 million member Democratic Party, either into the Greens, which would be the obvious choice again, he basically took the Green Party platform, watered it down 10%. So that would be the obvious choice. Like that is the party that he should be in and that his followers should be in at a minimum. Or into a newly established Labor Party. Fine. Some people just really hate the Green Party. The Dems clearly and obviously never would. But again, whatever new party, it's going to end up looking a lot like the Greens anyway, with just some stylistic changes. The Dems clearly and obviously never would be able to get elected again without the left. So what I want you to envision here, there's a lot of software that's sold, at least back in the day. Now they use internet authorization, but I know they still use this for some things like highly secure programs. There would be a USB dongle, which is just a great word. But basically the program will not turn on, will not authorize, unless you have the physical USB stick that you stick into the computer to make it run. Okay, so what we can do in the short term is to withdraw enough people into an organized group out of the Democratic Party. And yeah, you're starting to build a thing for yourself, but it's not just about winning the elections. Obviously, you're not going to be big enough to do that in many areas at that point, but what you can do is take an organized chunk out of the Democratic Party, which is where Bernie was running, and you make a movement. Let's call it the Keyholder movement. Yes, I did come up with that. Let's call it the Keyholder movement, which is an independent party which acts as that dongle for the Democratic Party, without which the Democratic Party openly and clearly, and this is discussed in public in the media, the Democratic Party cannot win without the votes of this group. Well, obviously, this is resting on the militants and discipline of that group to not vote, don't cave, don't vote for them unless they incorporate, the following whatever 10 or 20 demands into their thing, and then hold to that. Obviously, if they say that they're going to do it and violate, you just say, you build in a clause, if you fail to deliver on this, we don't care what the excuse is, you're not going to win anything. This would be as you're building your own thing, which is really the point. And the Democratic Party, to a certain extent, likes being out of power. They like being the opposition power that, would do something if only they could. But again, getting another narrative there of like, look, you lost because you're super unpopular and we're making demands. And really the point of all of this is to create a discussion around the Democratic Party would rather fucking lose, which you and I listening to this as a communist or communist adjacent, communist curious person probably are aware of already. The Democratic Party would rather lose to the right than work with the left. Okay, they have no interest in a popular front. That's like a ridiculous notion, which the revisionist CPUSA is pushing, is like, you got to work with the Democrats, make a popular front. They don't want you in their popular front. That's not a thing that they want. They do not want to, they don't, anyway. The only thing they're possibly interested in is not being made to look like complete jackasses. And, you know, they need to keep up this veneer of like they fight for democracy and all the other things that keep the donations rolling into their party. If they get exposed as they won't work with the left, I mean, then that puts them on the defensive of like, then they have to portray the left as maniacs who want health care and not have wars and higher minimum wage and increased labor rights, like just maniacal shit, you know? That it puts them in that position where they have to do that. And, you know, putting them on the defensive as much as possible, that means leverage for us, power for us. But pulling enough people out that you act as that check, the veto, the dongle on the Democratic Party. I said Keyholder, we can call it the Donglists. An organized group that acts as, you know, look, working, as long as the left stays within the Democratic Party, you want these things the Democratic Party is never going to deliver. As long as you stay within the party, they sweep your voice under the rug. You never get heard from. If you pull out as a group and refuse to give this party your votes unless they meet certain conditions which are clearly spelled out by the party and presented publicly, and it becomes, you know, a household discussion, you know, Keyholder, whatever movement thing, that is pressure. That is leverage for the Democratic Party to do these things. They still refuse to do them. Then you go further and you say, stop voting for this party, vote for us instead. And again, the electoral is such a small part of this, but that's what people respond to. But then you get them involved in the party and the community organizing, all the other stuff that you're doing. But basically abandon the Democratic Party, not just in the elections, but abandon them generally. This is a party that's been letting people down for such a long time. Get out of the party, work with us instead. Yes, we have rules. We don't do the corporate money. We don't do this and that. But that's all part of a plan to migrate people out of that party and into the party where they belong. Is everyone going to leave the Democratic Party? Absolutely not. But you get to collapse them as a party while holding them in check. Like, that's the thing people always miss when they're like, I don't support a third party because the third party can't win. Yeah, but you could get enough people out where you publicly hold, you know, a metaphorical gun to the head of the party and say, look, you do these things that we are demanding, or you lose, and everyone will know that your refusal to serve the people is why you lost. And again, they'll still come up with excuses, but it's all part of seizing part of the narrative and shifting the power to us away from them. You know, we focus a lot on the, you know, a third party can't win the election or whatever. And, okay, yeah, it's a super rigged system. Like, we don't have democracy. There's no democracy to save, first of all. So, like, we can dispense with that narrative. But, like, is it a democracy when you only get two options and both are for fucking imperialism? But anyway, you know, too much cognitive dissonance. I can see that is kicking in already. People's eyes glazing over just hearing that. But building a thing that, while being a class-independent political home, is also a check on the Democratic Party and leverage. That to me, it just makes sense. Bernie failed to do any of this, or failed as in didn't. I think it was not just a failure, but a conscious refusal to do it. Where was I in here? If Bernie had led a 10 million or 15 million voter chunk out of the 50 million member Democratic Party into the Greens or a newly established Labor Party, whatever, and a left coalition is fine, a left Congress, whatever, the Dems clearly and obviously never would be able to get elected again without the left. That's already happening to some extent, but it needs to be clearer and more organized and tied to specific demands. And in a way that would matter and couldn't be hidden from public discussion. This would bring the left into the light and put our agenda on the table, putting the rest of the struggle's success on our own internal politics to bring the correct ideas, strategies, and tactics to the fore. In other words, we still have to wage a good fight. Most of the real fight would still be outside the electoral system, but we wouldn't just be flat ignored by the mainstream anymore. And this would pull so many more demoralized and disheartened workers back into the fight. Look, I know if you're in another country that doesn't have US type politics, this probably sounds pathetic. The reality is, even something like this would be such a step forward. Even getting a keyholder movement who can do this kind of, vote strike in an organized way based around specific demands, this would be a step up in terms of right now, there's no leverage on the Democratic Party. There's literally no way to even attempt to get them to do anything. This would be something that has not been tried. And I haven't actually even heard anybody pushing this. So, because nobody gets further than the, oh, well, if you make your own party, you can't win. Boom, done. The brain shuts off. But okay, well, what if we couldn't win, but we could at least make them lose? And I see that starting to emerge now. But let's organize it. Let's organize it, because that's a tendency that's emerging. We can at least make the Democrats lose because they didn't do what we want. What did we want them to do? Well, present it to them in the media, publicly, in formal demands, and say, look, you'll win if you do these things and stick with them. You will lose, and you will lose in the future if you don't. And again, this shifts the discussion, shifts some of the power into what the fuck is going on with the Democratic Party. It's how you peel people out of that party and get them into something else. And that's where, well, then what's your party doing? And then you point to all the community organizing that you're doing, and you point to all the independent working class, labor support that you're doing, and so on. And that's where you sell people on the virtues of your party, not just that you're not the Democrats. I mean, you already distinguish that by the demands that you're making on the Democrats, which is, I think, where we have to start, or at least logically, you'd have the power to do that before you had the power to, just simply be bigger than them. That's not going to happen for a long time. But it'd be one of the first steps that such an organized movement would be capable of. Even before you can win elections, you can make them dance to your tune a bit. Or if they don't, you get something to talk about. And something to talk about is always important in politics. A lot of this is about stories. And the more accurate they are and the more they speak to what people experience and believe, you rally people's support that way. Anyway, if you and I can figure this out, so can Bernie. He knows it's just not what he wants to do. Ask yourself, why is that? Capitalist so-called anti-fascism, in quotes, is extremely limited, consisting of certain idealists who want to try to fix the problem of capitalism's crises of profitability in less brutal ways than just open terrorism. There's some bourgeois anti-fascists who are like, can't we just, be nicer to the workers? And then the more reactionary factions of the capitalist class are like, no, we need the fascism because we're not taking any chances. But that's bourgeois anti-fascism, is just like, well, let's keep doing the same thing, but just a little less brutally. But sometimes their system calls for more brutality. But even when they're successful in the short term, even when bourgeois-led anti-fascism is successful in the short term, they absolutely do not have a long-term solution to the capitalism's inevitable decline and are wasting the global working class's time. Who has betrayed us, social democrats, it rhymes in the original German, became a slogan almost a century ago for good reason. It is social fascism's nature to oppose the working class and give capitalism time to prepare quote-unquote emergency, meaning fascist measures to protect itself. Bernie Sanders, working with the Democrats, is no exception. And we had some screenshots from Bernie Sanders and AOC's anti-oligarchy tour and the Bernie. So that's a Counterpunch article from July 2015, if you want to look it up. Bernie Sanders deal with the Vermont Democratic Party not to start a third party, and they wouldn't seriously challenge him. You can just go to the community post. It's pretty recent.